I knew the path I was taking was dangerous, but the feeling of being on the edge of the abyss, of being able to fall without anyone to stop me, was stronger than any remorse. Sometimes, desire is like a fire that grows inside you, uncontrollable, threatening to consume everything around. And me? I was ready to let myself be consumed. It was an ordinary day, or at least it seemed to be. The house was quiet, the soft afternoon light illuminated the room, and I was there, sitting in my armchair, trying to ignore the thoughts starting to form in my mind. My boyfriend, always so reliable, was away on a business trip, and I had space for myself. Just me and him. The masseur. I already knew him, of course. For months, he had been coming to my house, always so professional, so discreet. But today, something was different. He seemed more confident, more suggestive. His hands, which used to be firm yet respectful, began to slide over my skin with more intention. I didn't know if it was my imagination or if he was truly touching me in a different, closer, more intimate way. The afternoon warmth was in contrast to the coldness in my hands. I was nervous, perhaps even a bit uncomfortable, but there was something about the way he looked at me, something in his eyes that made me feel he knew exactly what I wanted, what I was hiding. "Are you comfortable?" he asked in a low, soft voice. I just nodded, not knowing what to say. But he didn't seem to expect a verbal response. He continued with the movement of his hands, now running them down my back with an unexpected gentleness, as if he were feeling the texture of my skin, as if he wanted to understand the contours of my body. It wasn't just a massage. It was a touch charged with something more, something dangerous. Then, at the moment he touched my thighs, something changed. A wave of heat rushed through my body. My muscles relaxed, but my mind was at war. I knew I was wrong, that I should stop it, but the feeling of his touch kept enveloping me, seducing me, inviting me to go further. I could feel the weight of his hand on my thigh, as if he was deciding whether he could touch me more, if I would allow it. And I, unconsciously, leaned closer to him. My breathing became faster, heavier. With each touch, the tension increased, the air seemed thicker, and I knew I wouldn't be able to turn back. I was so close to the line that separates right from wrong, so close to the temptation calling me, that I no longer knew where reason ended and desire began. "You're tense," he said, and his voice sounded lower now, more intimate. "Let me help you relax even more." I wanted to say something, to pull away, but my words were stuck, locked deep in my throat. He seemed to understand that, and with every touch, with every movement, he guided me toward the abyss of what I knew was forbidden. But what was forbidden if not a provocation? What was guilt if not something to be savored and rejected at the same time? He moved upward, slowly, along my legs. With each touch, fear and pleasure mingled in a delicious way, as if I were being pulled into a current and didn't know whether to resist or surrender. I could feel the warmth of his body near mine, the intensity of his gaze penetrating me, and something inside me broke. My hands clutched the arms of the sofa, fingers tense, trying to hold on to some shred of control, but there was no control left. He knew that. His fingers touched my skin with more intensity, and my breathing grew heavier with each touch. I wanted him to touch me more, to be bolder, closer. And at the same time, I hated myself for wanting this, for losing myself so easily. "Do you want me to stop?" he asked, and for a moment I thought he wanted to test me, to challenge me. I shook my head, trying to drive away the thoughts. I wanted more, much more. But I couldn't admit it out loud. I couldn't. I was with him, but I wasn't with him. I was thinking of someone else, my boyfriend, and that made me feel even more alive, more excited. The guilt was part of the pleasure, and this pleasure was mine, mine alone, my secret. He continued with his massage, now moving up my back, pressing harder as if it was a need for him, a demand he couldn't help but fulfill. When he leaned in closer to me, I caught the scent of his body, a warm, masculine aroma, something that made me want more. I knew he was more than aware of what he was doing. He wanted me to give in, to surrender completely. And I was about to do just that. The silence in the room was palpable, but at the same time, every movement he made, every light touch on my skin, was like a silent scream echoing inside me. I felt vulnerable, exposed, but in a way that somehow gave me pleasure. I knew he noticed it. I knew he felt how close I was to giving in. He didn't need words. Touch spoke for itself. His hand now moved up to my neck, making my body shiver. I felt the soft pressure of his fingers along my collarbone, and the warmth of his proximity left me breathless. I was aware he was testing me, waiting to see how far I would go. What he didn't know, or perhaps knew all too well, was that I was lost, completely lost in that irresistible tension. With every movement, he got closer. I could feel the lightness of his body against mine, a closeness that made me forget the world outside. The safe place I thought I had, the steady relationship I had with my boyfriend, all of it began to fade, to vanish in the face of the moment's intensity. When he finally leaned in closer, his lips passed very near my ear. A soft sigh escaped his lips, and I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. My mind was screaming at me to stop, that this wasn't right, but the desire was so much stronger. "I know what you want," he whispered, his voice husky, loaded with an intensity that made my body tremble. "You want more." It was a statement, not a question. He knew exactly what he was doing, and somehow that made me lose control even more. I felt the urge to pull away, but my body was at war with reason. My legs moved slightly, as if they wanted to open, inviting him to go further. He began to explore my body more boldly, his fingers now firmer, more intentional. I could no longer hide how I was feeling. Each touch of his made my body react, and the sensation of being touched by him in such an intimate, personal way left me beside myself. I was in a total state of confusion, caught between the growing pleasure and the shame that tried to dominate me. "Let yourself go," he murmured, as if reading my thoughts. "There's no turning back now." I closed my eyes, trying to find some thread of lucidity, but everything around me was blurred by the fog of desire. I knew there was no going back. We were both on the edge of something we couldn't control, and with each passing second, the tension grew. When his hands started to move downward again, this time further down, I felt my heart racing, almost out of control. My body was reacting to his proximity, to his touch like never before. And without thinking, without reasoning, I leaned back slightly, allowing him to get even closer. The sensation of being touched in such an intimate and deep way, with every breath, every movement, was overwhelming. I knew what he wanted. I knew he was just waiting to see how far I would go, how far my resistance would yield. "I'll never pressure you," he said, almost as if trying to justify his behavior, but at the same time, his voice was loaded with an unspoken desire. "But you're telling me everything without needing to say a word." I was speechless. He was right. Every glance we exchanged, every touch he gave me was telling me something more, something I didn't want to admit, something I had never desired before. What we were creating was a fantasy of body and mind, a dangerous and forbidden game of seduction. Something I was about to embrace, even if it cost me my sanity. Suddenly, he pulled back a little, which brought me some relief. But then he leaned in to look into my eyes. His fingers slid to my neck, lightly touching my skin. I was breathless, trying to cope with the intensity of every moment. "You like being in control, don't you?" he asked, almost as if he was teasing me. "But you know the control isn't yours anymore. Everything is out of your hands now." I knew he was right. Control had been out of my hands from the moment I let him get close. From the moment I accepted the touches, the glances, the tension that was forming in the air. And when he leaned in again, now with even greater intensity, something inside me broke. I knew there was no going back. I was out of my mind. My mind fought against my body, but my body was completely surrendered. He knew it, and his hands became more certain, more accurate. Every touch felt like a promise of something I didn't know whether I should desire or fear. But at that moment, fear no longer existed. Desire had consumed everything. When he pulled away, my mind was still in a whirlwind, but something in my body wouldn't allow me to escape. He had touched me in a way I didn't know I needed. His touch, now bolder, more exploratory, made me feel as if I was floating, as if the ground was no longer a safe place. I wanted more, and that terrified me. He leaned in again to my ear, and his warm breath caused shivers all over my body. His lips were so close I could almost feel them touching my skin. "You're going to let me take you, aren't you?" he whispered, and I could hardly breathe. I didn't answer, but my body said everything he needed to hear. I felt the tension in my stomach, a pressure that only increased with each passing second. It was as if he knew exactly where to take me, where to make me lose reason. With every touch, he explored more, delved deeper, and I didn't want it to stop. When his hand slid down to my waist, I felt such an intense heat that it seemed my entire body was burning. My heart was beating so fast that I could barely focus on anything besides his presence, his fingers moving more skillfully, with more intention. It was as if time had stopped, and the only thing that mattered was the moment he touched me. That moment seemed eternal, and I was so lost in it that I no longer knew what was right or wrong. The thought of my boyfriend, to whom I knew I should be faithful, vanished. The guilt, which should have been a burden, turned into something intoxicating, something pulling me deeper into the abyss he had opened. He pulled me closer, his lips now brushing mine but not daring to touch them. Tension between us was palpable, the frustration of wanting something I knew was wrong but wanted so badly. I closed my eyes, feeling the internal struggle waging inside me, and then, finally, I gave in. I surrendered to desire. The need for his touch, for his presence, was stronger than any restriction I had. "You are irresistible," he murmured before finally leaning in and capturing my lips in a deep, hungry kiss. It was a kiss that spoke of everything we couldn't say. Kiss that consumed me, that made me forget who I was, what I represented. My hands, which had been tense before, now moved without thinking, exploring his body, touching his warm skin. I felt his muscles, the firmness of his body contrasting with the softness of his skin. With every movement, every touch, I felt more lost, more dependent on him. And the more I gave in, the more he seemed intent on making me surrender. When he finally pulled away from my lips, I was breathless, my eyes closed, waiting for more. He looked at me with a smile that bordered on triumph, but there was also something soft, as if he knew that, at that moment, he had complete control over everything I felt. He knew what he wanted. And more importantly, he knew what I wanted. With a smooth movement, he laid me down on the couch, his eyes never leaving mine. He was so close I could feel the lightness of his breath, the pressure of his body against mine. I wanted him to touch me more deeply, more intensely. I wanted him to be bolder, to make me forget everything that connected me to the world outside. He began moving again, his fingers sliding along my thighs, up and down, faster now, more determined. I became more sensitive with each movement, more surrendered, more anxious for each touch, for each approach. "You won't stop, will you?" he whispered in a voice laden with desire. "Not now, when you're so close." I was so close to completely giving in, to losing myself in this game of seduction and pleasure. I knew there was no turning back. And for a moment, I thought I would lose myself completely. That I would finally give him what he wanted. What we both wanted. I was utterly vulnerable, more exposed than ever. Every move, every touch seemed to pull me deeper into that abyss that I couldn't, nor wanted to, escape. I knew I was crossing an invisible line, that what was happening between us was something that couldn't be undone. But at the same time, I couldn't bring myself to care. I wanted this. I wanted more. He leaned over me again, his eyes fixed on mine as if waiting for me to say something. Something that might make me turn back, perhaps. But I said nothing. There weren't enough words to express what I was feeling. The sensation of being completely in his hands was overwhelming. I no longer knew whether I was living a fantasy or if I had truly become lost in it. "You don't have to hide anymore," he whispered, his voice soft, almost commanding. "You want this as much as I do. You don't have to be afraid of what you're feeling." A shiver ran down my spine. He was right, I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear had been consumed by the need, by the insatiable desire that now consumed me. The pleasure, the temptation, everything seemed so close, so within reach. And at the same time, there was something liberating about allowing myself to live this, about admitting to myself that, yes, I wanted it. I looked at him, and in that fraction of a second, everything seemed to make sense. I was no longer trying to convince myself to stop, to tell myself that what I was doing was wrong. I was allowing myself to feel, allowing myself to live that moment without judgment, without restraint. And as he continued to explore my body with his touch, his hands moving more firmly, closer to where I needed him most, something inside me shattered. I felt whole in a way I had never experienced before. Pain of betraying my boyfriend, the guilt that crept in with every thought began to fade. The feeling of freedom, of no longer having to hide from myself, from my own desires, was stronger. I was finally surrendering to my own truth. With a precise motion, he enveloped me completely, holding me in a possessive embrace, and I knew there was no room left for regrets. What had happened, there was a silent but powerful confession. I no longer needed to find the words to express what I was feeling. He knew. I knew. When we finally pulled away from each other, still breathless, his eyes never left mine. I knew he was waiting for something. But I had no more doubts. What we did, what happened between us, was a choice I made. Choice to free myself from the chains of morality, from expectations, from everything that limited me. There was no going back. I had lost myself, but in the midst of the chaos, I had also found something new. Something I may never have expected, but that now, more than ever, made sense. And then, as the silence filled the room, my voice sounded, low and laden with a confession I hadn't known I needed to make, but that I was finally ready to own. "I never thought I was capable of this," I said, my voice trembling but honest. "I never imagined I would cheat, that I would do something so wrong. But now, after everything, after what happened here, I know it's not just about him. It's about me. I needed this. I needed more. More than what I was getting." Confession was like a release. I no longer cared about guilt. I no longer cared about what was right or wrong. What mattered now was the truth I had found in myself, something I had never allowed to flourish. The pleasure, the tension, the forbidden, all of it merged into a truth I could no longer deny. "I just hope you don't judge me," I continued, looking at him, my voice calmer now. "'Cause in the end, this was all about me. About what I wanted. What I needed to feel." He said nothing. But the smile that appeared on his lips was enough to let me know he understood. He knew what I was trying to say. He knew that, somehow, he had been merely the catalyst for something that was already within me. Something I had ignored for so long, but that I could finally confront. I stood up, feeling the weight of the moment. What happened between us didn't have an explanation, nor did it need forgiveness. It was an act of surrender, of pleasure, of a silent confession that didn't require more words. I had given myself to him, but more importantly, I had given myself to me. As he prepared to leave, I didn't know what would come next. What would happen to me? What would happen to my boyfriend? But one thing I knew for certain: what happened there in that moment was a secret I would carry with me. An intense, forbidden memory that was now a part of me forever. Now that you know the truth, what would you do in her place? Leave your opinion in the comments and share your thoughts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell to receive the next intense and captivating stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.